Well, good morning, everyone. And it's been said to you already many times, but I just want to add my voice to it. Happy Mother's Day, man. It is fantastic to celebrate this day and to do it together as a church and be able to worship. Man, it makes it really, really special. So thank you for being here. I also want to comment on, I'm not sure on all of our campuses, so let me just send a shout out to all of you and to our online. And last week or the week before, I commented that, there had been and I don't remember the number, 430 some baptisms. And then last week, there were 28 baptisms. And this week, there's 14 baptisms. And the reason I'm pointing this out is baptisms represent something powerful. It's people's response to Jesus. Don't ever let anyone tell you God is not moving in people's lives. If you're ever hesitant to invite somebody to church, get over it, because God is moving. And they might come to church and hear the very thing God wanted them to hear, and that's the reason so many people are being baptized. So, hey, I'm going to begin right now with a confession. I'm going to get this off my chest. I'm just going to tell you up front, I'm biased. So you just got to take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt, because I'm biased, okay? I'm about to introduce who I think is the best speaker on the planet and my all-time favorite person on the planet. I'm going to introduce my wife. Did I mention I'm biased? Okay, I love this woman. And we've been married for more than a few years, 46 years or something like that. We've been married, and she and I have 2 grown kids, and we have 8 grandkids, and her love for them is just, it's fun to watch. I am biased. I got to tell you too, when I met her, when we were dating, it was probably about the third. I know I've told you this, but I got to tell you again. About the third date, we went up. We were at Saguaro Lake, and we had a little picnic, and we were going to talk, except she wouldn't talk. And I just said, Lisa, we got to come to an understanding. I can't carry all this conversation. Like you got. She's very shy and very reserved and quiet. And I says, you got to speak. You got to. Oh my goodness, I had no idea what I uncorked. Now, I'm not saying that as a put down. I'm saying that to tell you this. Over the years, I have watched this woman find her voice. And she has supported me through all the years of ministry, but in the last, 10 years, 15 years, which I'll address a little bit here, I've just watched God grab her heart, and she is being used by God in some incredible ways. Now, here's the deal. It's Mother's Day, and she's going to talk about Mother's Day, but I said, sweetie, what I really want, this is probably the last chance you're going to get to address this church in its entirety. And I said, talk about Mother's Day, but also please explain to people why you are so passionate about what you're passionate about. Now, here's another thing I want to tell you about my wife, but I'm biased. She's understated, meaning, some people are like so much, when you meet them, you realize there's so much more to them as you get to know them. That's my wife. Now, give you an idea what I'm talking about. She has founded an international ministry that most of you don't know about because I don't speak about it, but it's called Amplify Peace. And literally, she's getting on a plane. As soon as she gets done here, she's getting on a plane to go meet with people in Belfast, Ireland. This is my wife. She travels all over the world on this international ministry that she's got. She also has a radio show. She has a podcast. I never talk about it. She has, she's involved in our global, deeply involved. She sits on boards. She chairs boards around the country. She's just more than she appears to be, okay? And I am so delighted because, again, the thing that I've asked her to address with you is just give an explanation of why do you care so much about what you care so much about. I think it would be really, really beneficial. So mothers, you're going to hear a bit about Mother's Day. And if you pay attention, the whole thing has to do with what really, really matters. And this is on the heart of every mom. So I could keep talking. I'm going to quit talking. Would you please welcome out here to her own home. This is my wife, Lisa.
Thank you.
Did I mention she was beautiful? I forgot
stop,
that.
Stop. Well, a lot of times when I'm sitting like where you guys are, and I'm generally in the back, in a section back here, and I'm just sitting listening, and occasionally Cal will say, I'm going to share a story about my family or my wife, and when he says that, I start to squirm and cringe because I don't know what's coming out of his mouth. But today, I have the mic, right? Yeah. Well, I just want to say again, I want to personally welcome each and every one of you today. And as already been expressed, I know this is a day that has a lot of mixed emotions with it, but I am so happy and thrilled to be here with you today and just to share this time together. And today I just want to talk a little bit, like what Cal said, I want to talk about life and growing and the process of life and just how we can become our best selves in this thing called life. I lost my mom in 1998, and I lost her way too soon. And my mom was one of my best friends. I loved this woman. And I can still remember a lot of the things that she said, that she taught me. I think about her all the time. And I can still hear her laughter. She was just joy. She walked into a room and it lit up. She loved people, and people loved her. And I learned the value of friendship through my mom because she just always had girlfriends and always was talking, and I just hear her laughter. And it's, one of the things that I appreciate is like she really taught me like how to nurture, how to mother, how to be. And I just, I hope that I've been able to live up to some of that, but she was a great role model. The thing I regret is my kids were very young when my mom passed away, and so she never got to see my kids, her grandkids, grow up and to become who they are. And she never got to meet my grandkids, her great-grandkids, who I know she would have loved and they would have loved her. But her legacy still lives and still goes beyond. Well, again, I want to share a little bit, like Cal said, about my story. Because I was born and raised in the church as a child. It's all I knew. I've always known Jesus, always been involved in the church. I get married, and then Cal and we've been in ministry our whole adult life and in the church. So it's just normal to me. It's what I know. But something happened about 14 years ago in 2010 that I wasn't anticipating, and it was totally unexpected. And it totally got my attention, and it propelled me into a journey I didn't anticipate, but one that was really significant for me. You see, in 2010, Cal and I got invited to attend the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. And for those of you that are not familiar with that, it's an annual event that's been going on every year since the 1950s, in which the president, the vice presidents, and the people come and participate, and where faith leaders and leaders from around the world, about 2,000 of them, come to this gathering because it's not a Christian event, it's about Jesus. So you'll have different faiths, different ethnicities. It really is a beautiful picture. When you look around, you just see all these different dress, and you hear these different languages, and you're just interacting with people you would never be in proximity with. And when we got invited and we went there, I was super excited because it was, I knew it was going to be a significant experience. I knew I was going to be having conversations with people talking about my faith, talking about their faith, talking about Jesus. I anticipated that. What I didn't expect was that I was going to be having conversations with Muslims who were talking about Jesus, and they had tears in their eyes. And it just rattled me because I hadn't thought about that. And I left very, very confused. And it sent me into this, kind of propelled me into this, where I had so many questions. And I thought, I need to learn. I don't understand this. I don't understand what just happened. I don't understand these conversations. And so I set out on a journey to listen and learn. I wanted to know more about God. I wanted to know about the kingdom of God. I wanted to know more about people and God's love for all people. And so I did this. And as a result, it opened up opportunities for me to start traveling. And a lot of places I went was the Middle East and Africa. And so I just remembered one of my earlier trips, I had a friend, I just started reaching out to people because I knew that a lot of my stories were incomplete. I knew that God was trying to get my attention on something, and he wanted to teach me something, and I was going to begin to grow in ways I had never grown before. And some of that sometimes is painful. But but it's also a beautiful journey with God when you say yes and open yourself up to that. And so as a result of this, I met a woman that was very engaged with different organizations. And one day she sent me a text. And it was shortly after that the Syrian war broke out. And Syrian refugees were flooding into the country of Jordan. And they were setting up these temporary, but they're permanent, refugee camps. And she sent me this text and she said, I just feel compelled to go see for myself what is really happening. And I know it sounds crazy. Do you want to go with? And she had me at crazy. And I said, yeah, I do. I would love to go to this place. So together we went. We met up with a couple of other women. She had arranged for us to meet with some organizations that were doing some work there. And with them, we went inside this camp. And inside the camp, we went inside tents. And we met with people, and especially women. We would go in these tents and we would sit with these refugee families and we would listen to these stories from a lot of these women. And what was amazing and powerful is these women would share their stories of what life was like back in Syria. And they would share that, I had 2 cars. I had a washing machine. I had a job. I had, a lot of the modern conveniences. And then here I am today, sitting in a tent, and we looked over in the corner, and there's this little stove, and that is now their kitchen. And I remember sitting in those tents with these women, and I just remember thinking, this could have been me. This could be me. But by the grace of God, I don't live here. I live where I do live, and I have certain freedoms, and with those come responsibilities. And so then I got invited to go to Iraq, and it was about a year after ISIS had invaded the country. And on that trip, I actually had to take out a war risk insurance policy to go because it was considered one of the top most dangerous places to go. But I was with a small group that I knew people there. And Cal and I talked to him, and we prayed about it, and he's just like, you have my blessing, and I just trust you into God's care. And so I went, and with this small group, we just started talking to people and visiting different places. One day it found us in this room, and there was this woman who wanted to come in and share her story with us. And she had just recently, literally within days, had escaped captivity as an ISIS bride for the past year. And she came and she wanted to share her story. During that past year, she had lost her entire family. All her kids, her husband, her parents, and she had 1 daughter left. And there she sat across the table, there was about 6 of us, with her daughter sharing her story and her journey. I had no box for this. I couldn't even relate at all and comprehend. And I knew God was getting my attention, showing me something. And yet as women, we connected across this table. And then another trip that I found myself was in Rwanda. And many of you may remember in 1994, a devastating genocide erupted where 1 million people were killed within a month. And so as we went there, I asked if we could talk to women and if we could talk to both survivors and perpetrators just to hear stories. And so we sat one day with this woman that was sitting next to a gentleman, and the man just sat there with his head down most of the time, wouldn't give eye contact, and kind of like this. And the woman was just sitting telling, and she started telling the story. You see, this man sitting next to her had slaughtered her entire family. And now they sat next to each other. They actually lived next to each other because they were a part of this reconciliation group that to build the country back and to build lives back, there was reconciliation that had to happen and forgiveness. And so she talked of forgiveness and living next door to this man that slaughtered her entire family. Again, I sat there. I had no box for this kind of forgiveness. I'm seeing it right in front of me, and it was the real deal. And that God started informing me and showing me things of life that I had never seen. Another time I was preparing for a trip to Israel, Palestine. And I knew this was going to be a significant trip because I knew that I would be meeting people on both sides of the conflict that had very different narratives and different stories. And I knew that my understanding was incomplete. And so I knew there was going to be, I needed to really be prepared, and also just reading and stuff. And so in my reading, preparing for this trip, I ran across a quote. And as soon as I read that, I knew it was going to be significant for me on this trip. And the quote was this: "Now that I'm seen, I am responsible." Well, one day we were walking in Bethlehem, and we were walking along the wall, and the wall was covered with graffiti, and people just expressing through art and through words and just putting it all over this wall. And so we were just walking, our little group was walking along the wall, and I came to a particular spot in the wall, and there was the exact quote: "Now that I've seen, I am responsible." And God had my attention. And I knew going back home, I would not be the same, and that God was asking something different of me as a peacemaker. Because once you've seen, you can't unsee. You have to do something, and I knew for me there was no turning back at that point. Well, today I claim my identity as a peacemaker, deeply rooted in Jesus and in his teachings. And a peacemaker is very different from a peacekeeper. A peacekeeper is somebody who just maintains the status quo. They just want to keep peace at all costs, not disrupt anything. Where a peacemaker is somebody who disrupts the status quo for the sake of justice, because they know that there's an injustice and it needs to be stirred up. So they stir up peace for the sake of justice and to love. And so as a peacemaker, Jesus talked about peacemakers. And in Matthew 5:9, he said this: "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." I believe with my whole heart that peacemaking is the way of the gospel. And when we're no more like Jesus and when we are peacemakers, and we're stepping into those messy, hard places for peace, for unity, to love. So what can this look like? Well, I want to use the metaphor of a tree and of trees, because I love trees so much. I just think the greenery, they're majestic. And so there's something peaceful and calm about trees. And as a kid, I used to love to just go and play in trees. I used to actually love building forts around trees. And I grew up here in Arizona, and I didn't grow up around a lot of trees, the desert, but my extended family was all from the South. And so every summer, my family would go to Georgia and visit our cousins. And my cousins lived in a house that had a backyard filled with trees, lived in the woods, and there was this creek that ran through their property. And we would spend most of our days out in the trees building forts and just letting our imaginations run wild, and just experiencing that. And I remember sitting in the fort and just sitting outside. I still do this to this day when I'm walking in the woods. I'll just look up through the trees to see the top of the trees, to see a blue sky, to see clouds floating by, and to imagine the shapes of the clouds. What do they look like? And still for me to stay, it's a very peaceful place to go, just to see the swaying of the trees, hear the wind whispering, and just to feel a gentle breeze. It's in these moments that I feel safe, grounded, and peaceful. Well, if we take the analogy of the trees, we have to first start with the soil. And then from the soil, we move to the seed. From the seed, we move to the tree. And from the tree, we move to a forest. I want you to think about the kingdom of God as a vibrant, thriving forest. So if we start with the soil, we look at the soil, and it's something down below, underneath. And I have a good friend, Cal and I both do, Joe and his wife Mary, and they have this beautiful yard, and it's so green and lush and beautiful, but it hasn't always been that way. For many years, their yard just kept growing weeds and had brown patches and just patches of missing grass. And they literally tried for years to try to do something about that. And they would have specialists come out, landscapers, and go and try to help that. And they would give suggestions of treatment, and they would try it, and they still had weeds and they still had brown spots. And so after years of trying and having numerous people come out, they were about ready to give up, and then they thought they'd give it one more try. And so they had a special technician come out, and the guy took a survey of everything, and he looked at it, and he said, "You don't have a grass problem or a weed problem, you have a soil problem. Your soil is filled with toxins and poison. So no matter what you put on top, they're not going to grow. It's not going to grow. It's not going to thrive. You have to first deal with the soil and treat and get the soil to be healthy. Once you have healthy soil, then you can grow stuff. And so they took his advice. They treated the soil, and now they have a beautiful yard that is as it is, should have been all along. And so we look at what's underneath. A lot of times we want to take care of the stuff that we see that's on top, but a lot of time, some of our challengers go down deep and go deep down to the soil. Well, what creates good soil in our life that allows us to grow? Well, it's good nutrients, it's healthy environment, healthy relationships, it's living Jesus-centered, rooted and grounded in the Word. But we want the beautiful grass without going deeper and without putting the work into making our soil healthy. So at this, I have to just share a story with you about Cal. I wasn't going to, but it's too appropriate and it's too recent, so I have to do that. So what you may or may not know about my husband, and I so appreciate about him, he's very enthusiastic when he gets into something. He gets into it with his whole heart, and he has to research and learn about it. And that's one of the things I love about him. He's a learner. He reads all the time. He studies. He loves to learn new things. And he's also really great around the house. He likes to fix things. He loves to figure something out. If there's a problem, he wants to figure it out and fix it. And so recently we moved into a house that has real grass. And I say real grass because the house that we moved from has artificial turf. So now with this real grass, and that's one of the things we loved about this house was the grass, the yard was so green and lush and beautiful. Well, it seems like overnight, my enthusiastic husband decided he was going to really become Farmer John with this yard and landscaping, and he's going to learn all he can, and he has to get the right tools, right? So we got lawnmowers, we got edgers, we got trimmers, we got blowers, we have all the right tools we need to make sure this yard and our landscape is going to be thriving and beautiful. We got fertilizer, we got everything you need, except, well, let's just say the other day I walked outside in the backyard with Cal on Thursday, actually this week, and I'm looking around at this yard that just a few weeks ago was very green and lush, and I'm looking at it, and it's dying in spots, like big patches are brown and dying. And I was standing next to Cal, and I just appreciate him. I just appreciate all he loves to do, and he takes such good care of our home and our yard and me and everything is great. And I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but I said, babe, what's going on with the yard? Like, there's brown and there's death in our yard. And it was so funny because, he always has a great answer. And he's like, well, okay, I see, I hear it. I hear you. Yes, I know. I'm aware of that. And it's, I just thought I was going to fertilize. And so apparently I over-fertilized. I got a little carried away, and I've cut it a little too often. See, that yard I don't think has ever been cut so many times in its life in 1 week or 2 weeks. And so he's like, but I got it under control. I'm learning. I'm figuring it out. We're going to have green grass soon. It's coming. So apparently, in our over-enthusiasm, we can burn things. In our over-enthusiasm, we can burn out people too, just with great motives, but things can happen. And so I'm confident that our green grass is going to come back, and I'll keep you posted on that. Well, Colossians 2:6-7 says this, so then, just as you received Jesus Christ as Lord, continue to live your lives in him, rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. See, as followers of Jesus, we are to remain rooted in Christ, drawing strength from the nourishment that comes from him, staying connected to him. And that's characterized by a life of gratitude and faithfulness. Well, the soil is home to the root system of trees. And when we look at trees, we just generally see what's on the top. But there's a whole nother world underneath where the roots of the trees are extending and going out. And the health of the tree depends on the health of the roots, which depends on the health of the soil. Is the soil sending out good nutrients, the moisture that the root system needs to be able to funnel that up to the tree so the tree can be all that it was created to be? And so we see the significance of planting in good soil. When you do plant in good soil, you're guaranteed you're going to have your root system is going to be thriving and be good. And I think that's like it is with life. Like when we plant ourselves in good soil, in good community, in the teachings of Jesus, having healthy relationships, being connected to each other, then we are able to thrive as human beings and being able to weather the challenges that come in life and that surround us. So we move from soil to seeds. And Jesus used to tell stories all the time, and they're called parables, and they just had a heavenly meaning. And so one day, he told the parable of the sower, and it's found in Matthew 13, 1-9. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seeds, some fell among the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let him hear. You see, the seeds that fell on the hard soil were eaten by the birds. The seeds that fell on the rocky soil grew quickly, but then prematurely died. And some young plants were strangled by the weeds, but then there was those that fell on good soil, and they grew to produce good fruit. You see, in this parable, Jesus is not talking about physical seeds. He's talking about us. He's talking about us planting our seeds and talking about planting kingdom seeds, seeds of love and humility and patience and mercy that leads to wisdom. Because we are constantly, as human beings, sowing seeds. We are planting seeds, and sometimes we do that wisely and sometimes foolishly. But we are challenged to sow the seeds that provide the soil and the space for others to grow. So how do we do this? Well, it starts small. Small gestures of kindness, grace, love spoken, a smile, just those small gestures in life that any moment we have the opportunity to extend that. And we find ourselves in those places, and sometimes we choose not to do anything, and sometimes we choose to show up as Jesus would have us do. Well, just a couple of weeks ago, I was shopping in Costco, and I was walking down this aisle with my cart, and I see this older couple standing in front of me, and I see this younger woman that she was having an interaction with this older woman, and it just seemed like a very pleasant interaction. And there were smiles and there were gestures, and then the younger woman turned around and walked down the aisle. And so I proceeded to go forward, and then I came across from this older woman, and she just silently, very gently, just reached out her hand and handed this to me. And it's a little handmade heart, and there was this little tag attached, and it said, "Hi, please take me home. I am a hug from above. You are never alone. Remember, Jesus loves you." And it was just it wasn't weird, anything weird about it. It was just her heart. And I just looked at her, and such a beautiful smile on her face. And I took that and I said, "Thank you." And I walked away, and it just did something to me. And I just thought, okay, I need to go back to that woman. There was something that I was drawn to her. So I circled back and I found her. And I just went over to her and I touched her on the shoulder and I said, "Thank you. Can I give you a hug?" And she goes, "Oh, honey, I love hugs." And she gave me the biggest hug. And there in Costco, we had a moment. And I felt Jesus. I felt like Jesus was in that place. And it's the simple things that we can do in life, that it doesn't have to be something grandiose. It's just, what do you have that you can give somebody in that moment? We are constantly sowing seeds to grow trees that we may never see. And sit under the shade of trees we'll never be able to sit underneath. But we do that. We keep planting. And we know that God takes what we have to offer and he multiplies. And he does what only he can do when we do what we can do. Well, when we talk about these seeds become trees, and in thinking about trees, there is actually scientific evidence that shows that the exposure to a forest or being in the woods actually reduces human stress levels and just creates this calming effect on us mentally, that is good for our mental health, to be in nature, to be surrounded by this. But trees take time to grow. And we want to, I don't know about you, but I'm impatient. I want a 50-year-old mature tree right away that is producing fruit, that has beautiful leaves and shade that I can sit under. But that's not how it works. It starts with a seed that sprouts into a sapling that eventually becomes a vibrant tree. And I like this video that just shows how when you plant a seed, this is what we want. We want to see it really bud and bloom before our very eyes. But it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in time lapse. So like a tree, our life starts small, and we grow slowly over time. God starts small. He starts with an acorn that becomes a mighty oak tree. And we can learn a lot about trees, how they interact with each other, how they communicate with each other. Because underneath the soil, again, there's this complex communication system going on. And they warn each other, and they're physically connected, but they're also just sending out nutrients to each other and just being aware of each other. And different species coming together and different organisms, they all connect under the ground. Well, I learned something really fascinating. There is actually a tree called a mother tree. Now, this mother tree is known in the forest. It is kind of in proximity with other ones, and it sends out nutrients to the little seedlings, to other trees. It can sense danger, and it sends out things to protect the trees. It warns them of possible insects, possible weather, possible chemicals. It has this complex way of communicating with the rest of the trees. And it is said that even when a tree is starting to die, a mother tree will will her nutrients to the other trees around her. So even in death, she continues to feed and to provide for future generations. I think that's a beautiful example of just life, of our lives touch other lives and are constantly connecting. And this is where I think women, we're kind of wired that way. We think more generationally. We think down the road about our children and grandchildren and the next generations. And what we do today matters down the road, even if we can't see it right away. And we're wired for connection. We're wired to be in proximity with each other. And so we learn a lot. Now this interconnectedness of the roots and of trees and the way they communicate actually has a name, and it's called the Wood Wide Web. Now say that fast 3 times, right? And I just find that fascinating because who knew that underneath? Because what we see, most of the parts we see about a tree that are visible are like the trunk and the branches and the leaves and the fruit and the birds and the creatures that are around it. But a lot of the tree that really provides the health and stability for the tree is below the surface. And so we tend to look at a tree and we see all these parts as separate, the trunk, the branches, the trees. Much as we look at people, we see people separate and as seeing us as interconnected and as needing each other. And my flourishing depends upon your flourishing. And so what can that look like? Well, over time, throughout history, there have been countless individuals that have seen a need, that have seen something, that have I got to do something, and invested their life and sacrificed for something they would never see the fruit of, the results of. But yet, we're the beneficiaries of a lot of those people that have gone before us. So whose lives are we touching today that someday will look back and know that somebody ahead of them did something? Well, I don't know if you realize this, but the early church and the early Christians, they're responsible for giving us a lot of the humanitarian systems that we have in practice today. I don't know if you realize that back with the early Christians, the early church, they were under oppression and persecution from Rome. And yet, in spite of this, they loved Jesus deeply. They loved each other. They were committed to each other. And as a result, they literally changed the world. And that's why I stand here today. That's why you're in this room, because they were faithful to Jesus and the little things, even against all obstacles. Because back in that day, human life wasn't honored as much, and especially children. And so if a child was born and the parents didn't want him, especially if it wasn't a boy, they would put a baby outside the walls of the city to let it die of exposure. Well, Christians started seeing this and said, this is not of God. This is not, every human life is sacred and deserves lives. And so it was the Christians that would go out and collect these babies and bring them into their homes and raise them. And today, we have orphanages because of these early believers. They also, during the day, as Sean talked about, leprosy was rampant. And so When people would run from lepers, it was the Christians who would run to them and take care of them. And a lot of those that were living with diseases, it was the Christians who would tend to them and go and literally touch them and be with them. And as a result, we have hospitals that care for the sick and the dying. The early Christians gave us education. They spoke into that, and they tried to educate. They also gave us a lot of art. And so we are the beneficiaries of a lot of the early Christians who followed Jesus, showed up differently, and lived deeply rooted into him. When we invest in people's lives today, much like planting trees for future generations, we can create a chain reaction of transformation that touches countless lives, and we may never know. A lot of times we tend to tell ourselves a story going, it's only me, what can I do? Does what I do really matters? And I want to say, yes, it matters. When you say it, because you're with Jesus, and God is with us, and God multiplies, and it's God doing the miraculous in our lives when we just say yes. And then collectively, when we all say yes, there's power. There's power in that, and we can change the world, little corners of the world. Well, as we come to the forest, we've gone from soil to seed to trees to the forest. And this church has been a beautiful forest for our family. Cal and I planted our roots deep into this place 37 years ago. We raised our children, and I honestly don't know who we would be if it wasn't for you and for this church. And so I just want to say thank you for being that place, for being that forest that has allowed us to put our roots deep, to grow, to be who we are, to go through the challenges of life together, and to just be and serve Jesus together. Isaiah 61:3 says, they will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. And that's the church at its best. So what does a thriving garden or forest look like? We just look at the Garden of Eden. God created it in the beginning, and it was perfect, and it was beautiful, and it was thriving, and there was lush, and there was greenery, and there was trees, and there was water flowing, and the perfect climate. But most importantly, there was the presence of God. And God and man walked together intimately. And that's what we're trying to create, is that shalom, that peace, that wholeness of peace. And so what if we bring heaven to earth? What if we take a little glimpse of that and we just try to create that here on earth as we're living? Because heaven is the future of our seeds. And that's what God is calling us. He's giving us that picture of what it could be, what it once was, and said, I need you to recreate that. I need you to live that way so we can restore that here on earth. Well, I want to conclude with a story and a quote as we come down, because the story involves you in many ways. You see, last August, our church, we came before you and we said, hey, we want you to be a part of something with us. And we partnered with World Vision and their Chosen program. And some of you may remember this. We came before you and said, we believe God is calling us to do work to connect, to plant seeds in a country called Malawi in Africa. And there's a need there. There are people living in remote areas that have no education, no water, no shoes, really no hope in many ways. And we believe we can be Jesus to them. So we came to you and we said, we want to sponsor children through World Vision in Malawi. And so we set this goal as a church of wouldn't it be amazing if we could sponsor 900 children and change their lives and change that whole area? And so we came to you and we asked you when we proposed that. You showed up miraculously, so generously, so much like Jesus, with a heart of love and compassion. And not only did you blow that goal away, but you sponsored over 1,500 kids through your generosity. Yeah. That's a big deal, because those people will never be the same. And you gave generously to people you will never meet, and maybe for most of you, a place you'll never go to. But you did it. You showed up because you said yes to Jesus. Well, the first week that we put the Chosen program out, and we had in the lobby all over the place, 2 people walked into our doors for the very first time on that Thursday night. And when they walked in, it was a young woman named Jonah and her husband. And when Jonah walked in, she saw something so familiar to her, and she was taken back. As she looked around, she saw this logo, and she nudged her husband. She said, "Do you see that logo? That logo changed my life. What is going on here?" And she came and sat through the service, and she heard about the Chosen program. And she came to us, and she told us her story. You see, 15 years ago, there was a church like ours that was given the same task. Will you love a community in the Philippines? They have to walk miles for water. People have no shoes, no education. Would you sponsor them? Jonah was living in that community in the Philippines and was a sponsored child through World Vision. And so when she walked through our doors, she saw her story. And so we have connected with Jonah and walked with her. And this past Thursday night, Jonah was here with her husband, and she came forward and got baptized in that baptistry right there on Thursday night. You see, you never know when you plant a seed what God's going to do with it and whose life you're going to change. She says her village today, they have running water, there's education, there's college graduates that have professional degrees. She's a college graduate living here. It changed their lives, and their village is now self-sustainable. And so I want to say thank you. Thank you that you plant seeds that is literally changing lives all over the world. That's the church at its best. Well, I ran across a quote that I don't know who attributed to, but it says, "In every seed is a potential for a tree, and in every tree is a potential for a forest, but it's all contained in the initial seed." You see, what we do today matters. How we live, how we communicate, how we interact, how we see ourselves, how we see God, how we see others, and how we respond. Our words and actions today have the power to shape and change generations and generations to come. So thank you for being part of God's bigger story. Together, let's do things that are only God moments to really change this world for the better, because we have God, and with God, all things are possible. Can you imagine the forest that we can create together? Let's pray. God, thank you that you choose us over and over, that you believe in us, you see us, you ask us to join you in doing remarkable things. And Father, I thank you for each person on all of our campuses and those listening online. I don't know their story, but you do. And if there's somebody that just doesn't feel enough, I pray that you would just remind them that there's a vibrant, beautiful tree inside of them waiting to emerge. And for those that don't know you, that they would say yes to you and just join the journey. Thank you for your love that never ends and that it's deep and wide. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, for those of you listening online, this concludes our service. I want to thank you for joining us and just wish you a happy Mother's Day.